Hi, everyone. My name is Anita Banerjee here at Forefront. I am the Director of Public Policy. If you're not familiar with Forefront, our mission is to build a vibrant social impact sector for all people in Illinois. We're the only statewide association in the U.S. that represents both grant makers and nonprofits, as well as their advisors and allies. We do this by providing education, advocacy, and research, mobilizing our members around issues like the one you'll hear about in today's presentation. But before we dive into today's content, a few housekeeping notes. Everyone's lines are muted to keep the background noise to a minimum. We do welcome your questions. We have a very lengthy presentation for this afternoon. However, we ask for folks to locate the chat box over to the left-hand corner of your screen. Type in any questions as you think of them, and as we get later into the session, as we have time, we'll look to address them at the end of the presentation. We are recording the webinar, and we'll be sure to share the link with you afterwards in case you'd like to review the material. So, without further ado, we are thrilled to announce our presenters who are joining us for today's webinar. We've got Arindira Rendon. She's the Director of National Partnerships at the Resurrection Project. Ere has served as the organization's lead strategist and manager on local and statewide campaigns impacting the lives of immigrants. We also have Fred Tsao. He is the Senior Policy Counsel at the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. In this position, he provides research and analysis of changes in immigration-related policies and procedures to ICIRR members and allies, and he also assists with the Coalition's legislative advocacy efforts. With that, I will hand it over to Ere.
Thank you. So my name is Ere Rendon. As Anita mentioned, I work with the Resurrection Project, where I serve as the Director of National Partnerships. And within my role, I oversee our immigration organizing and immigration advocacy and education initiatives. I myself am a DACA recipient. I came to the U.S. when I was 4 years old to meet my dad, who came when I was 8 months. And I've had DACA since November 19th of 2012, and I'll have it until November 19th of 2018. So what we thought we would do today is first get started with a little bit of DACA basics. What is DACA and who qualifies and who has DACA right now? Then we'll get into a little bit more about what the announcement that was made on September 5th means. And then Fred is going to lead us into talking about what it means in terms of legislation and also some of Know Your Rights information that everybody should know. So DACA was an executive action that was placed by President Obama on June 15th of 2012, and it had an initial start date of August 15th of 2012. So for people to be able to qualify for DACA, you have to have been born after June 15th of 1981, meaning you were under the age of 31 the day of the announcement. You have to have arrived in the U.S. before turning 16. Arrived before June 15th of 2007, so 5 years prior to the announcement, and with that you have to demonstrate continuous residency in the U.S. You either had to have been currently in school, have graduated from high school, or have attained a GED, and have not been convicted of a felony offense, a significant misdemeanor, or more than 3 misdemeanors of any kind. Significant misdemeanor was a made-up term. There is a list of some of those classifications, but usually whenever somebody had some sort of criminal record, they were advised to seek an attorney. So once people applied for DACA, they received protection from deportation as well as a work permit for 2 years, and you had to renew every 2 years. So if you're like me, I applied the first time in 2012, renewed in 2014, then again renewed in 2016. So when you would get your work permit, with that you'd be able to go in and apply for a Social Security number, and then also obviously after that, things like driver's licenses, state IDs, you could get yourself a full-time job. Some scholarships were able to open up to you. So now the age of all DACA recipients are between the ages of 15 and 36. So although we do think of this as a young population, and usually you hear DACA students or DACA youth, we're not necessarily all that young. I'm 32 years old myself, and my brother is on the oldest end of the spectrum, and he is about to turn 36. So if we're going to look at how many people have applied, so this is initial applications, and this is as of June 30th, 2017. So this is 793,000. That means those are the people who have been approved for DACA at least one time. So that's the most accurate number that we're going to be able to get because we only get numbers quarterly. The highest countries with the most amount of DACA recipients is obviously Mexico. Over 70% of all DACA recipients are from Mexico. And then the next few are all from Latin America. South Korea has a pretty significant population, as well as the Philippines. If you go down a couple more of countries, you'll start looking at countries like India, and then there's actually over 100 countries that are represented. As you can see in the column to the right, as there are DACA recipients in all 50 states, including Hawaii, which I'm always curious about. And then the state with the lowest amount of DACA recipients is actually Vermont, but we are across all 50 states. So there's been some research done to try to figure out what was the result of giving folks now the opportunity to be able to work, giving them a Social Security number. It's been very difficult to be able to get scientific research to be published, but this is a very good study which finalized this year, and it interviewed over 3,063 recipients. So it's a pretty good number of participants of the program, and you can see. And this is all with self-identification as well as they responded themselves. So of the 3,000, of all of the recipients, 42. It looked like they had an increase of hourly wages by 42%. So they went from getting paid $9.83 an hour to $13.96 an hour. Obviously, this also has an implication on taxes, an increase. So we are contributing more in terms of taxes to the economy. 95% of the respondents were either employed or were currently in school. 54% had reported buying their first car for the first time, and 12% reported purchasing their first home. Here at the Resurrection Project, we do a lot of work around DACA home ownership, and so firsthand have some experience in terms of the opportunities that opened up for DACA recipients once they did have that Social Security number. Although ITIN loans exist for their undocumented parents, the mortgages that they were able to qualify for with a Social Security number and a work permit did expand. Education of the folks that responded, 46 were currently in school, 46% were in school, 4% were in high school or a GED program, 20% were in some sort of in community college getting their associate's degree, 4% in trade, and 70% were getting their bachelor's degree. If you look at the studies from Migration Policy Institute that did an analysis of immediately eligible DACA recipients back in 2012, they found that only 5% of all DACA of all potentially DACA beneficiaries had a bachelor's degree. So now we're looking at a huge increase in the amount of folks that were going to go get their bachelor's degree, primarily because now they were able to work. We do see that most DACA recipients don't go to school and work at the same time because we still don't qualify for FAFSA, although you do qualify for some loans, as well as there's been significant movement towards getting more in-state tuition. And then looking at integration of all of the of everybody who participated in this study, 90% reported obtaining their driver's license or identification card for the first time after DACA happened. So there has been significant changes in the lives of DACA recipients, and I think that that's expected whenever you give somebody a work permit and a Social Security number. The ability to be able to work and to be able to make a living definitely improves their quality of life. So now let's get into what the announcement means that was made on September 5th by Attorney General Jeff Sessions. So what we'll go over right now is what it means for folks that were potentially eligible and then folks that are already enrolled in the program. So as of September 5th, USCIS was no longer going to accept initial DACA applications. This is going to be felt primarily in 15, 16-year-olds who were just becoming eligible to apply. You do have to be 15 years old to apply for DACA. So now we do have this new wave of primarily freshmen in high school who are going to graduate without any protection from deportation and who are going to start trying to figure out how to go to college without having DACA, work permit, or a Social Security number. I sit next to a train, so I apologize for the noise in the background. DACA renewals, it was announced that this is going to be a phasing out of the program, meaning that as people's DACA expires, that's when they will not be able to renew. However, they did put in this cushion time of a 6-month window, which means that anybody whose DACA expires before March 5th of 2008, they were given exactly 1 month to apply for renewal. So we're looking at, we just have a few days left until October 5th. According to the Department of Homeland Security, there was approximately 154,000 documented who needed to submit their applications before October 5th. So they basically took 6 months worth of renewals that needed to happen over 6 months, and they crammed them all into 1 month. Lots of organizations, as you have probably noticed, have increased their capacity to be able to take in to more DACA recipients so that they can renew, as well as a lot of campaigning with Univision, ABC7 here in Chicago to be, advertising that date as much as possible so people knew to take out their work permit and come in and renew their DACA as soon as possible. And the reason why we want people to do that is because it gives them 2 more years of a work permit and 2 more years of protection from deportation. Anybody whose DACA expires after March 5th of 2018 is no longer eligible to renew, meaning that as people's DACA expires, that's when we will see their protection from deportation and their work permit expire. So if we're looking at the program is going to be phased out basically over 2 years. So anybody who's applying for renewal now will more than likely have their DACA end in the first quarter of 2012. So if we take 730 days and we divide it, if we take the total number of 800,000 and we divide it by the 730 days that we have left of the program, we're looking at about 1,095 people losing their work permit and their protection from deportation every single day. Something that became very evident immediately after this announcement was people weren't necessarily planning to submit their DACA renewal so quickly. Many folks thought that they had a couple more months to apply, and so it became very it became a barrier for people to be able to submit their application on time. The application is $495. That goes to USCIS or to Department of Homeland Security. Quickly the Mexican consulate announced that they were going to continue to give scholarships. They've actually been giving them for several years now, anywhere from $300 to the $500. Folks do have to be Mexican to qualify for this, a Mexican national, as well as demonstrate demonstrate financial need. Here at the Resurrection Project, we also have a scholarship, and that's available for folks that come in and apply to renew their DACA through us, as well as any other non-for-profit in Chicago through our referral process. And then the Mission Asset Fund nationally set up a scholarship, and the website's there. Anybody can apply online, and that one will be mailed to you. We're obviously running short on time, so if there is somebody from Chicago, I highly encourage them to come to our office so we can cut the check immediately. And then through the Second Federal Credit Union has always provided a loan for DACA. In the past, we have actually used it as a credit building tool to get people on the pathway towards home ownership. That continues to be the case. It is a credit building tool, although the interest rate was dropped to 0% in light of the announcement. So as I mentioned, DACA gives you protection from deportation as well as work permits. And so what's going to happen to people's work permits is that all documented will have the right to work legally in the U.S. until their work permit expires. As we saw earlier, many people are employed, so they will be able to stay at their jobs until their work permit expires. It is very possible that once their permit expires or close to it, their employer will ask them for their new work permit or could terminate, and if they can't provide it, could terminate their employment. This isn't a new issue for us. It's actually happened in the past. There's always been backlogs at USCIS, and so sometimes people don't have DACA status for a month or two at a time, in which a lot of folks are put on leave from their jobs until they get a new work permit. So we are fairly aware that we believe as soon as people's work permit expires, their jobs will probably terminate their their employment there. So advanced parole was something that was also changed during the September 5th announcement. Advanced parole was on top of having DACA, you could apply for advanced parole to leave the country. And what that would do is it would give you a certain period of time to be able to re-enter the country for educational, work purposes, or humanitarian reasons. In the September 5th announcement, they did say that anybody who had DACA would no longer be eligible to apply for advanced parole. It's very likely that the reason that they did this is because when people leave on advanced parole and when they come back, they get a stamp on their passport, and that stamp basically means you have entered with inspection. Once you enter with inspection, you're eligible to adjust your status within the country. And so there were several folks who got advanced parole, and because they were perhaps married to a U.S. citizen, upon reentry into the U.S., were able to get that stamp and then were able to adjust their status in the country. So it's likely that they realized that this was happening, perfectly legal form of doing this, and so that's why they canceled advanced parole. There were several hundreds of advanced parole applications pending, and they did decide that they were no longer going to process them. Folks that applied for advanced parole should be expecting to get their funds back if they have not been approved already. So Social Security numbers, once people had their work permit, they were able to go in and apply for a Social Security number. Things get very complicated here, but Social Security numbers are valid for life. So once somebody got that Social Security number, it's theirs forever. Although when we went and would get our Social Security cards and they get mailed to us, it did say on the Social Security card, it does say on the Social Security card, valid for work only with authorization only, right? So whenever we go apply for a job, if we take that card in, they will ask for our employment authorization card. However, Social Security numbers can continue to be used for education, for banking, for housing, and other purposes, and as well as paying taxes, including taxes on things like consulting income, which I will talk about next. How are people going to be able to continue to work? As I mentioned, we're not everybody who has DACA is a student. Actually, the vast majority aren't. And so work is a huge is a huge obstacle. And so with the what's going to happen is folks will probably be terminated from their jobs. And perhaps the easiest way for them to be able to continue to make a living is to be working as a consultant, or to be own their own business. So this is sort of a loophole because you won't have to do an I-9. You won't have to talk about what your status is. However, it does obviously change the type of relationship you have with an employer. You will not have the ability to be on their benefits, as well as the employer will no longer be an employer. They'll just be a company that's hiring the services of a contractor, and so then therefore won't have to pay things like like medical leave or any kind of benefits for this employee. So it is going to become very necessary for us to teach our documented about their labor rights once their DACA expires, so that they can understand how they'll be able to continue to make a living after their DACA or their work permit expires. Some DACA folks are going to school, and some are in college themselves, and so going to school is going to continue to become be a way. People are going to have to find a way to continue to go to school. So in Illinois, in-state tuition is available to all Illinois residents who have lived in Illinois for at least 3 years. So that includes people that have DACA, that includes people that are U.S. citizens, legal permanent residents, as well as undocumented immigrants. I myself was able to go to college because of this law. I graduated 1 year after the law passed from high school, and so I was able to go to school, and this is before DACA, obviously, and so was able to go as an undocumented student. In Chicago, the Chicago Star Scholarship for all city colleges of Chicago is open to all Chicago students regardless of their status. And then there are also numerous private scholarships available. In general, what we tell people, what we used to say to folks before DACA was, if they don't ask you what your status is, you don't have to say it, and you can apply. And if they don't ask you for your Social Security number, you don't have to put it down, and you can apply. So that's a rule of thumb: is if don't ask, don't tell, and that's definitely a policy that we encourage everybody to abide by. So what's going to happen to sensitive information? As everybody, when we applied for DACA, we had to put down the address that we live in. We had to put down every single address we've ever lived in. We had to put down where we went to school, and just give a lot of sensitive information over to the government. So there is folks that are concerned and are worried about what's going to happen to all of them, particularly if they live with their undocumented parents. So it is important to note, though, that when we did apply for DACA, we applied with USCIS, which is a different and separate department from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. So being at USCIS's radar does not necessarily mean that a DACA recipient will be placed in deportation procedures. It would be very outrageous if they just handed over the information of 800,000 DACA recipients over to ICE. However, it is possible for people to end up in deportation proceedings even with DACA, but when you had DACA, you were able to use DACA to defend your deportation. Once their DACA expires, Dreamers will not be able to use their DACA to stop their deportation. So although it is unlikely that USCIS would hand over all of the information for all 800,000 over to ICE, if somebody does get put in the process of deportation, they will no longer have DACA to fight their deportation. And then it's also noteworthy to say that they will hand over information if there is a criminal activity during the time that somebody has DACA, or if there's suspected of fraud. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Fred, who's going to talk a little bit about what's happening moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Ede. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Okay. I wanted to pick up where Ede left off and specifically address one topic, which is driver's licenses. Here in Illinois, we have a somewhat different set of laws governing driver's licenses from other states. In that here in Illinois, anybody can get a regular driver's license if that person has a Social Security number. That means that DACA recipients who with current work permits and who were able to get Social Security numbers were also able to get regular 4-year driver's licenses. However, the rules regarding driver's licenses changed July of last year with a couple of state laws that actually implements longstanding federal law that Illinois is finally just now getting to implement. These laws now require that new license applicants need to be asked about their immigration status. So if someone is, has DACA but never got their license and is now applying for a license, that those individuals will be asked about their immigration status, and their license will only be good so long as their authorized stay is valid. Now, this law also applies to people who are here on temporary visas, like students and temporary workers. But in the specific case of DACA, say someone has DACA, but the DACA expires in December of next year. If that person is applying for a license, they can get a regular license, but their license will also expire in December of next year. So here in Illinois, we also have the temporary visitor's driver's license, which is something that Ede and I both worked on. So individuals who are not eligible for a Social Security number can get a TVDL. That includes individuals who are now out of status but who may already have Social Security numbers but could not get one now because of their status. So TVDLs are good for 3 years. They look different. And they are not valid for government identification purposes. So for instance, no one can use a TVDL to board an airplane or enter a federal government facility. TVDLs are available at 36 different facilities throughout the state. So basically all of the facilities where someone can get road tested. Up until about a year and a half ago, appointments were necessary to get a TVDL. Fortunately, the Secretary of State has removed that requirement, except for 2 facilities, the larger facilities on the north side and the west side of Chicago. And I just wanted to show in the next slide what a TVDL looks like. Those of us who are more familiar with the regular driver's license will know that it has a red stripe at the very top. The TVDL has a purple stripe at the top, and it's also marked not valid for identification, which you'll see in the red lettering close just below the banner at the top in the center. Okay, so there is one kind of quirky rule that regarding licenses for DACA recipients that I should also note here. That is that the Secretary of State has shared with us that they are, in cases of individuals who have licenses that were issued before July of last year, in other words, before these new laws took effect, if those individuals did not let their licenses lapse for more than 1 year, in which case they would essentially be applying for a new license, those individuals should not be asked about their immigration status unless they produce an identification document or other document that indicates their status. So Ed mentioned previously a don't ask, don't tell policy. That policy applies here as well. So individuals who have DACA, but their DACA is about to expire, if they fall into this category of having licenses that were issued initially before July of 2016, those individuals should not provide any kind of documentation indicating their status or otherwise discuss their status at the Secretary of State's office. And by the same token, they should also not be asked about their status. And if all of that is the case, then these individuals should be able to get regular licenses good for the next 4 years. I know of at least one individual who just recently went through this. I gave him this advice about not telling, and he was not asked, and he got a license for that will be good for the next 4 years. So I wanted to take most of the rest of this presentation to talk about the legislation that is on the table so far as resolving the situation with DACA recipients and other immigrant youths. So there are 5 bills. I won't go through each bill in great detail, but I do want to highlight the ones that are probably going to be the most significant in the weeks and months ahead. Starting with the DREAM Act. Many of you are no doubt familiar with the DREAM Act because it's been around for the past 16 years. First introduced in 2001 by Senator Durbin, and then and at that time by Senator Hatch from Utah. It's been reintroduced in each congressional session since then. It's historically been a bipartisan bill, and that's reflected in the sponsorship this year. Senator Graham is a Republican from South Carolina, been in the news recently. Senator Durbin's a Democrat from here in Illinois. On the House side, Congresswoman Roybal Allard's a Democrat from California. Representative Kaufman's a Republican from Colorado, and Congresswoman Ross Layton is a Republican from Florida. Again, fairly significant co-sponsorship on both bills, particularly on the House side where there are 5 Republican co-sponsors. So really basically the DREAM Act would cover individuals who came to the United States before turning 18. This most recent version requires presence in the United States for at least 4 years before the bill becomes law. Applicants would need to have been in the must not have left the United States for more than 180 days or half a year total, or 90 days on any single trip. They must have no lawful status, and that includes individuals who have DACA and also individuals with temporary protected status, which is a form of humanitarian relief for nationals of certain countries that have faced natural disasters or civil strife. Also, to qualify, you must have been admitted to an institution of higher learning, or have received a high school diploma or GED, or be enrolled in high school or a GED program. DREAM is fairly generous with respect to people who have previous deportation orders. They can apply. Also, there are disqualifications with respect to criminal background, actually somewhat similar to what we see in DACA. But waivers may apply in many cases, and also if someone has a conviction but got that conviction expunged, that conviction may not count against the applicant. So under DREAM, there's a 13-year path. So people applying for status under DREAM would apply for, at first, a conditional status that would be good for 8 years. Then they can transition to getting a green card or lawful permanent resident status if they meet one of one of four qualifications. They must either complete a bachelor's degree or 2 years of college, or they must serve 2 years of honorable service in the military, or have gotten honorably discharged, or they must work at least 3 years. Yeah, I think that's 3 years, or they can qualify for a hardship. So once they get a green card, then they can apply for citizenship after 5 more years of lawful permanent resident status. So the next bill I'm going to cover is a House Republican bill called the Recognizing America's Children Act, or the RAC, or RAC bill. This was first filed by Congressman Corbello, who's a Republican from Florida, back in March. This bill has 32 co-sponsors, including 1 Democrat. So it's primarily a House Republican bill. The requirements for RAC are somewhat similar to DREAM, though there are several significant differences that I'll point out. First off, the cutoff age for entry to the United States under RAC is 16 as opposed to 18, and the present date is set in the statute. It doesn't depend on enactment of the law. Instead, it sets a hard present state of January 1st, 2012, which, mind you, is even 5.5 months before the qualifying cutoff date for DACA. There's still the requirement with respect to travel outside the United States, and in addition to being present on January 1st, 2012, someone must have been someone must have basically been continuously present since that day. The requirements with respect to education are similar to DREAM, admission to an institution of higher learning, or completion of a high school diploma or GED. This is somewhat different insofar as there's a requirement for completion of a diploma or GED as opposed to being enrolled in school. Or the alternative is having a work permit, which someone with DACA would have received. There are, again, certain limitations with respect to people who have deportation orders, though there are specific exceptions if someone was allowed to stay in the United States despite having a deportation order, or if that order was issued before the person turned 18. People must also pass a background check, and there are disqualifications for any felony conviction or a combination of misdemeanor convictions for which the aggregate sentence was at least 1 year. In addition, there's a good moral character requirement. Good moral character is a term in immigration law that's defined in the negative. So we know what good moral character isn't, or what counts against good moral character, namely involvement in drugs, prostitution, gambling, alcohol abuse, or what's known in the statute as being a habitual drunkard. But basically, if someone has a relatively clean criminal records, that person would qualify for status under the RAC. So under this, like with the DREAM Act, people would apply for a conditional status. This would be good for 5 years. At the end of the 5 years, they can renew their status if they have enrolled in college, enlisted in the military, or worked 48 months. Then after they renew, they can apply for a green card basically within 10 years of anywhere between the 5 years and the 10 years. And then they would have 5 more years to qualify for a green card. Okay. Now, just in the last week or so, a couple of Republicans on the Senate side introduced their own version of DREAM. This is called the Succeed Act. The SUCCEED is an acronym for Solution for Undocumented Children Through Careers, Employment, Education, and Defending Our Nation. Again, this was just filed within the last couple of weeks. It's meant to be a Senate Republican alternative to DREAM. It's being pitched as a more conservative version, and as we'll see as we go through the requirements, it is significantly more rigorous than DREAM. Okay, so as with the RAC, there's a requirement that applicants have entered the United States before turning 16. Applicants must have been physically present in the United States as of June 15th, 2012, which is the date for DACA. They must have been under 21 and out of status as of that date. I'm sorry, that should be 31. That's a typo. So there is an age cap, which is 31, and that's actually the same as for DACA. Also, if the applicant is 18 years old or older, they must meet some additional criteria. They must have either earned a high school diploma or GED, or they must be enrolled in college, or they must be enlisted in the armed forces. So, in other words, it's not good enough to be finishing high school or enrolled in a GED program. They must have completed the diploma or the GED. Okay. As with the RAC, there are criminal disqualifications. People must go through a background check. They must also be of good moral character. They must meet that standard. In addition, there's also a requirement in the SUCCEED Act of paying any outstanding tax obligations. If someone had DACA, they were working, they did not complete their tax returns or pay all their outstanding taxes, they must do so before they can file for status under SUCCEED. And then there's a similar rule to the RAC with respect to final removal orders. That is, if someone was allowed to stay despite the order, or if the order was issued before they turned 18, the order will not count against them. Otherwise, though, the final removal order would disqualify them. Okay, so the process under the SUCCEED Act is as I mentioned, fairly rigorous. So like with DREAM and the RAC, the applicant would be applying for a conditional status. As part of the process, they have to waive any other forms, their eligibility for basically any other form of immigration relief. So, for instance, if say someone may qualify for SUCCEED, but they have a pending visa petition. They were sponsored by by their older brother or older sister. They would have to basically give up their eligibility to get a green card through that family sponsorship, or through just about any other means, short of a claim for humanitarian relief under really extreme circumstances. So under SUCCEED, applicants under 18 would get the status that would be good until they turn 18, and then they can then renew for another 5 years. If they're over 18, their conditional status would be good for 5 years. However, during those 5 years, they have to, either earn a college or vocational degree. They must have attended college for at least 8 semesters, which I'm assuming would be 12 quarters for those schools that run in quarters, or they served 3 years in the military, or they worked 48 out of 60 months. So 4/5, 80% of the time, 4/5 of the time. If they fulfill all these requirements, then they can re-up for another 5 years. And then after the full 10 years, they can then transition to lawful permanent resident status. In other words, get a green card. However, if at any time the person with conditional status runs afoul of any of these other disqualifying circumstances, their status can be terminated. So for instance, if someone gets conditional status but they fail to enroll in school, or if they enlist in the military and fail to complete basic training within 1 year, their status can be terminated. That also applies if they fail to maintain employment for at least 1 year or more, or if they trigger any of the other potential disqualifications, including good moral character or criminal conviction. Okay, and then once under Succeed, once someone gets a green card, they would have to wait five more years to apply for citizenship, which is the usual amount of time. There's also language in Succeed, and this is actually taken from Senator Tillis's fact sheet regarding Succeed. Individuals would not be able to petition immediate relatives to immigrate to the U.S. while they go through the legalization process. In other words, while someone has conditional status, or for that matter, if they have a green card, they are not allowed to sponsor relatives to immigrate to the United States. So this is meant to do away or limit the possibility of what's referred to as chain migration, which theoretically involves one immigrant sponsoring another immigrant, who in turn sponsors another immigrant to come to the United States. This is a fairly significant talking point on the part of certain members of Congress, as well as this administration. So let me just touch quickly on a couple of other pieces of legislation. First off is the American Hope Act, which was filed by Congressman Gutierrez and has over 150 co-sponsors, all of whom are Democrats. This is actually a much more generous alternative to DREAM, and Congressman Gutierrez filed this back in July. And you'll see here that the terms are much more generous than DREAM. So there is a cutoff of having entered the United States before turning 18, but note the present date in the United States, New Year's Eve of last year. So we're not dealing with dates back in 2012 or 4 years before this becomes law. This would cover far more immigrants, and particularly those who arrived much more recently. There's still the requirement regarding time outside the United States, and the applicant must have had no lawful immigration status. That includes some immigrants, well, quite a number of immigrants who have final removal orders. So, there are actually, under American Hope Act, there are actually very few requirements. They must pass a criminal background check. People can be disqualified based on certain criminal convictions, but in some cases, even those convictions can be waived from consideration for status. So you'll note here that there is no work requirement, there's no educational requirement. It's basically a pretty straight shot for conditional status and a green card. So under American Hope, applicants would apply for a conditional status. That status would be good for 8 years, but applicants, people with conditional status, can apply for a green card after 3 years if they've passed a criminal background check and they've not been convicted of certain serious offenses, and they have not abandoned their residence in the U.S. And on top of that, time during which someone has DACA would count toward the 3-year requirement. So for instance, if the American Hope Act were law today and someone had DACA going back to 2013, then that person's 4 years in DACA could count toward the 3 years of having conditional status, and that person could apply straight up for a green card. Then, applicants who then transition to getting a green card could apply for citizenship after 5 years, but the time during conditional status would count toward the 5-year requirement. So it's a pretty fast, this bill would provide a pretty fast track toward green cards and toward citizenship. Okay. I do want to mention here the Bridge Act, which was introduced back in January, on the House side. There were also talks about, some discussion about introducing this on the Senate side. But in the House, this was introduced back in January, basically as a stopgap measure to, understanding the potential rescission of DACA. The Bridge Act would have provided a temporary status for DACA grantees and certain other individuals who are eligible for DACA, while Congress worked out a more permanent solution. So this version, sponsored by Representative Kaufman, a Republican from Colorado, has more than 30 co-sponsors. And basically the requirements of Bridge Act would have been very similar to the requirements for DACA that Ed had discussed at the very beginning. So under Bridge Act, DACA grantees or people who are eligible for DACA could get what's called provisional protected status that would be good for 3 years. People with that presence would be shielded from deportation and would be work authorized, but in other words, enjoy the same benefits as DACA. Unfortunately, the Bridge Act does not provide anything further beyond those 3 years. So there's no language in there saying, well, if 3 years runs out, people can renew. Again, this is kind of in anticipation of Congress getting its act together within the ensuing 3 years. So I just want to close this out with some really basic Know Your Rights information. Obviously, there's a lot of anxiety in the community with the repeal of DACA, and kind of more generally with the increase in immigration enforcement activity. So we've done a lot of work. I know lots of organizations have done a lot of really good outreach with respect to educating immigrant communities regarding basic rights, particularly in the context of encounters with law enforcement and ICE agents if they come to someone's door. So I first want to emphasize that their basic rights under the U.S. Constitution apply to everybody. They apply to the people of the United States, not just the citizens, not just the people who are lawfully here. So what that means specifically is people have the right to remain silent. They don't have to answer any questions. They are not required to sign any documents, especially those they do not understand. But even documents they do understand, they are not compelled to sign them. When it comes to knocks on the door, ICE agents cannot compel entry onto residential premises unless they have a warrant signed by a judge. Most times ICE agents will have warrants, but they're signed by their supervisors, other ICE agents. Those are not good enough to compel entry onto a premises. So we advise people, we emphasize to people, do not open the door. If you do open the door, that essentially gives ICE agents the license to search the premises, and to question everybody who's present there. Last thing on this slide I want to touch on is people do have the right to speak with an attorney, to consult with an attorney before they answer any questions or provide any information to ICE. And this applies more generally in the law, with respect to encounters with law enforcement. I also want to note our family support hotline. If families are faced with an immigration enforcement situation, they can call this number, 855-HELP-MY-FAMILY or 855-435-7693, to get information, and also to report incidents, and also get referrals to legal services or other services that these families may need as they're dealing with their particular situation. So that is it.
Thank you, Ari and Fred. We are now opening it up for some questions. So if you have questions, please provide them in the chat box. We've got two queued up. The first one is, and I believe this one is probably for Ari, are there resources that we can direct DACA recipients to so they can learn their labor rights?
Sure. I usually refer folks to, there's numerous organizations in Chicago that work on labor rights. So like Centro de Trabajadores Unidos, Chicago Community and Workers' Rights, Arise Chicago. The only issue is that some of this is going to be a little bit new for everybody in terms of having a wave of people now learning how to be contractors. So I would say any of those three organizations would be great, but there's also others. I don't know, Fred, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, there's also Working Hands Legal Clinic, which is a law office that also handles many worker rights issues. They have a particular emphasis on wage theft, but they're also able to address many labor rights issues.
Okay, so the next question is, what should people on DACA who are already employed at an organization or company do? Should they prepare in some way, or should they expect to be fired?
You don't have to talk to your employer about it, and until your employer talks to you. That's one thing. And so in general, right, once your work permit expires, you don't have the legal authority to work in the U.S. anymore. However, it is really the employer's responsibility to be abiding by immigration laws. And so if they don't ask you, I probably wouldn't bring it up. And then also, it sort of depends on what situation you're in as well. So if you're working for a nonprofit that from the very beginning knew your status and has been supportive of undocumented immigrants, if they approach you and say, your DACA is going to expire, we can't keep you on as an employee, you could figure out if there's a way to stay on as a contractor. That's sort of the way that most of the folks that I know are approaching it. Just in general, if nobody asks, I wouldn't really bring it up.
Yeah, I would second that. Don't ask, don't tell.
Okay, so next question. How do you verify that the signature, referring to warrants, is a judge's signature? Is there a way to tell that on the warrant? So judicial signature,
judicial warrants look different from an ICE warrant. ICE warrants will have a banner at the top of it that basically says Department of Homeland Security warrant for arrest of an alien. Judicial warrants, on the other hand, are look like court documents. So they'll have at the very top, the name of the court, and then a caption, listing the case name and the case number, and a description of the document. And then the biggest giveaway is that ICE warrant documents at the very bottom will have a signature line identifying the ICE supervisory agent, as opposed to a judicial warrant, which will identify, which will have a signature line that says judge or magistrate judge. So the documents just look very different.
Fred,
I should.
Yeah.
I should. Sorry, Anita. I should add that ICE agents almost never get judicial warrants.
Fred, there was a follow-up question asking, would it be possible to provide pictures of what the warrants could look like so folks can determine the difference?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll share that and
those.
follow up with the recording later next week.
Okay.
Next question, what would the post-DACA driver's license process be for this, would it be the same for a state ID?
Yeah, the rules that apply to driver's licenses also apply to state IDs. That is that they are checking for immigration status now for people who are newly applying for state ID, and those documents are good. Are good, so long as the person's status is good. Unfortunately, there's no TVDL equivalent to a state ID. So unfortunately, that doesn't carry over. But again, undocumented people still can get TVDLs, and which is fairly significant.
Next question. So there were a number of acts that you shared about. Could you tell us of some pros and cons and the likelihood of the various acts passing?
Yeah. This is going to be the big question over the next several months. The vehicle let me put it this way: the two vehicles that are probably going to get the most attention are the DREAM Act itself and the Succeed Act. And the Succeed Act, if only because it is a Republican alternative that's been getting a lot of attention. But whichever vehicle moves forward, it is likely to be coupled with certain enforcement provisions that's people on our side probably are not going to like very much. So it's kind of a question of what's going to be acceptable to all parties. And I should add here that many people who are advocating for the DREAM Act are also saying that this passage of DREAM should not involve enactment of anything that would harm other family members or neighbors or classmates or anybody else who does not who would not benefit from that legislation. Having said that, though, the Democrats who as we saw that the DREAM Act is bipartisan, but the DREAM Act is largely being advocated for by Democrats. Democrats, unfortunately, do not control Congress, and so any bill that moves forward is going to have to receive significant Republican support in both chambers. And that gets back to what is it that will get the Republicans to the table to to work out an arrangement to pass the legislation.
So of these bills, are there any in particular that have good community support? And if so, could you mention which ones?
Yeah, certainly the DREAM Act is the one that people are most familiar with and that people are mobilizing behind. Over the past couple of weeks, there's been quite a bit of advocacy, by us and many others, for not just enactment of the DREAM Act, but also enactments that passes a clean bill without various enforcement provisions attached to it or coupled to it.
Okay, so this is a question for both of you probably. In the number provided of DACA individuals, is there a breakdown of folks with disabilities? And if so, is there information to share regarding that for folks that will be impacted since the announcement?
I'm not aware of any. Are you, Fred?
I'm not either. And it's not really a question that's asked on the application. So it's kind of hard to tell.
Okay. So
Sorry.
Here is a question regarding hardship. Would this include having a disability and leaving family behind that you support?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Does it
Sorry.
mean to prove hardship?
Yes, improving hardship.
Or like adjustment of status?
It sounds like they're asking that if they're trying to prove hardship, could this include a disability, and could this also include leaving behind family that you support? That supporting family, would that be considered part of a hardship?
Okay, I think I see where this is going. So, kind of more generally in immigration considerations, at least under the Obama administration, and so far this has not been changed under the new administration. There have been guidances issued with respect to what counts as extreme hardship, and USCIS, when it makes these hardship determinations, is supposed to factor in not just separation of family, but also whatever difficulties would be families would experience if they had to relocate, if they had to uproot from the United States to all be together. So the considerations of hardship are actually fairly generous under this guidance that came out almost 3 years ago. And again, this has not been changed under the new administration, though who knows?
Okay, so just a few more questions.
Sure.
Is there a database or list of the private scholarships that are available to the students with DACA currently?
I think we have. Go ahead, Eddie. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to make sure that I understand that it's for scholarships for college, right? Is that what the question is?
I believe so. Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
So with that, there's a few. So I think Fred can talk about the list that ICIRR has, but it's also really important to talk to your counselors. So your high school guidance counselors with the Illinois DREAM Act, they part of the DREAM Act was that high school guidance counselors should be trained on this information, as well as talking to some of counselors from your colleges, or here at the Resurrection Project, we have a program called La Casa that's at 1815 South Paulina. It's a center-based programming, and so folks can come here, and we have folks that help find scholarships that they could apply for. But I think the most comprehensive list is made by ICIRR.
Yeah, and we have a guide that's I'm just pulled up the document. It's quite long. It's 16 pages worth of scholarship listings. It's posted on our website. I can share the link with you, Anita, and get this out. Mind you, this is information that's from summer of last year, and so it does need to be updated. There's also a guide for undocumented students that was also updated last year, and a counselor's guide as well. I'll just send the link to the page, and which has the links to all three documents. But again, all three of these are current as of last year, so unfortunately they would not reflect the more recent changes under this administration.
All right, so here's a question regarding the HOPE Act. Fred, do you see the HOPE Act having any future?
Well, yeah, is there hope for hope? The fact that the bill is so generous, and the fact that it's only garnered Democratic co-sponsors so far, indicates that it's kind of more a marker bill. It's a bill of aspirations, of to plant the flag for what the co-sponsors all of them really want. It's more likely that whatever ends up passing would be more rigorous and more restrictive than the HOPE Act. Even the DREAM Act itself is more rigorous than the HOPE Act. But as I pointed out before, unfortunately, it looks like even then there may be some enforcement provisions coupled with the bill.
Okay, so is there any sense of timing on passage of any of these particular bills that you mentioned? Well,
I know there are discussions afoot. You can never really tell with Congress, especially this Congress. There's some possibility that because the debt ceiling and the government continuing resolution, keeping the doors open at government offices, are both up in December, that may be a break point, with respect to movement on DREAM as well. Certainly, I think we are all hopeful that there'll be some kind of resolution before next March, when significant numbers of DACA recipients are going to start losing DACA if they're not already doing so. Those are kind of the key signposts right now. But again, who knows with this Congress?
Yeah, fair enough. So it was mentioned that the advanced parole applications were no longer being accepted. As of what date did that go into effect, along with no longer processing current applications?
So that is started on September 5th, the day of the announcement. So any advanced parole applications that were received after September 5th would just be rejected. And then anything that was received before September 5th and there was no notice yet to the DACA person who applied, they're supposed to be mailing back their money order or their check, or a reimbursement for the fee that they had paid. So that started September 5th. And then also in terms of the no longer processing current applications, I think that also means for advanced parole, I think. And so that's also, That's also September 5th. So if you did not receive a notice that you have been approved for advanced parole, you're going to get your money back.
And should folks try to seek out the refund on their own, or would you just say give it time?
I'd say give it time now, but if you went through an attorney, you can consult with your attorney.
Okay, so we've got one more final question here, and I'm going to read it direct. It's from a gentleman that says, I work with individuals with developmental disabilities. One of our participants received DACA, and his DACA is about to expire in 2018. In order to receive services, everyone must have a valid Social Security number. We do receive federal and state funding. My question is, what can happen to this participant when he is not eligible for DACA?
I think that might be a little too much to answer because I don't really know what program this is. But the DACA recipient will continue to have a Social Security number. They just won't have work authorization.
So would they have to report this to the state or federal funding?
Well, I don't know if the state asks or if I don't know what the state or the federal authority that they're getting this from asks them to report.
Okay. Well, if there are any follow-ups to that, I'll be sure to share that with you.
Yeah, that one might be a little, I don't know if you want to add anything, Fred, but it can get very complicated when we talk about particular cases.
Yeah.
All right. Well, those are all the questions we had for today. I wanted to take a moment to thank both Fred and Ere for presenting today. This was very important, relevant, and timely information, and we thank you for taking the time to share with us and to answer questions. We will be sharing this recording and the slides for everyone that registered for today's webinar early next week. If you have any questions for Ere or for Fred after this webinar, feel free to email me, Anita Banerjee, at Forefront. It's my last name, Banerjee, B-A-N-E-R-J-I, at myforefront.org, and I'll make sure to share those questions directly with Ere and Fred. So that concludes today's webinar. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for all that you do. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.